the cold barrel of a gun pressed against Dr. Julian Carter's temple, an instant brutal contrast to the joy he'd felt just moments earlier. The night air still carried the scent of rain-soaked asphalt and the faint perfume of his wife's embrace. But now, all he could smell was fear. "On your knees!" The officer's voice wasn't loud. It was worse. A sharp, venomous command that sliced through the quiet hum of the city. Julian froze. A man who had built a life through discipline, brilliance, and hard-won dreams, suddenly reduced to a target. The hammer of the gun clicked back. The officer's eyes burned with something colder than hatred, a conviction that he wasn't looking at a man at all, but at a crime. The evening had begun with the soft clinking of champagne glasses and the murmur of joyful voices. Julian, a man who had carved his path from the rugged streets of his youth to the hallowed halls of neurosurgery, was celebrating a milestone, the successful separation of conjoined twins, a feat that had earned him national acclaim. His wife, Maya, a formidable civil rights attorney, radiated pride, her smile a beacon in the crowded restaurant. Their friends, a vibrant tapestry of doctors, lawyers, and entrepreneurs, toasted his success, their laughter echoing the rhythm of his own contented heart. As they left the restaurant, a light drizzle began to fall, painting the city in shimmering strokes of neon and shadow. Julian, feeling the familiar pull of the open road, suggested a ride on his prized possession, a custom-built motorcycle, a machine of chrome and steel that was as much a work of art as it was a mode of transport. Maya, ever the pragmatist, raised an eyebrow but relented, her love for him overriding her aversion to the inherent risks of a two-wheeled ride in the rain. They walked hand in hand to the parking garage, their footsteps a soft counterpoint to the distant wail of a siren. Julian's motorcycle, a magnificent beast of his own design, gleamed under the fluorescent lights. He had poured his heart and soul into its creation, every curve and contour a testament to his meticulous nature. It was more than a machine. It was a symbol of his journey, a tangible representation of his ability to transform raw potential into something extraordinary. As Maya settled behind him, her arms wrapped tightly around his waist, a sense of profound peace washed over Julian. The city, with its relentless demands and unspoken prejudices, faded into the background, replaced by the comforting weight of his wife's embrace and the promise of a quiet ride through the rain-slicked streets. He revved the engine, the powerful roar a familiar symphony to his ears, and they pulled out of the garage, leaving behind the warmth and light of their celebration for the cool embrace of the night. The city unfolded before them, a dazzling panorama of light and shadow. The rain had subsided, leaving the air clean and crisp. They rode in comfortable silence, the hum of the engine a soothing lullaby. Julian, lost in the rhythm of the ride, felt the stresses of the day melt away. He was no longer Dr. Carter, the celebrated neurosurgeon. He was just a man, sharing a quiet moment with the woman he loved. It was on a deserted side street, not far from their home, that their peaceful interlude was shattered. A police cruiser, its lights off, materialized from the shadows, its sudden appearance a jarring intrusion into the tranquil night. It swerved in front of them, blocking their path. Julian, his heart lurching into his throat, brought the motorcycle to a screeching halt. Two officers emerged from the cruiser, their movements stiff and menacing. The older of the two, a man with a weathered face and a cynical sneer, approached them, his hand resting on the butt of his holstered gun. "Well, well, what do we have here?" he drawled, his eyes raking over Julian and the motorcycle with a mixture of suspicion and contempt. "Fancy bike for a guy like you." Julian, a man accustomed to wielding a scalpel with life-saving precision, now found himself on the receiving end of a different kind of cut, the sharp, stinging blade of racial prejudice. The officer's words, dripping with a venomous mix of insinuation and accusation, hung in the air, a toxic cloud that threatened to suffocate the joy and peace of the evening. "This is my motorcycle, officer," Julian stated, his voice calm and even. a stark contrast to the storm that was brewing inside him. He had faced down death in the operating room, his hands steady, his mind clear. He would not allow this man's bigotry to unravel him. The officer, whose name tag identified him as O'Malley, chuckled, a harsh grating sound that scraped against Julian's raw nerves. "Sure it is," he sneered, his eyes narrowing into slits of undisguised disbelief. "And I'm the King of England." He then turned his attention to Maya, his gaze lingering on her with an unnerving intensity. "And who's this? Your accomplice?" Maya, a woman who had dedicated her life to fighting injustice, felt a familiar surge of righteous anger. She started to speak, her voice a low, dangerous growl, but Julian silenced her with a gentle squeeze of her hand. He knew that any display of defiance would only escalate the situation, and he was determined to de-escalate, to navigate this treacherous encounter with the same precision and control he brought to the operating room. But O'Malley was not interested in de-escalation. He was a man on a mission, a man fueled by a deep-seated prejudice that had been allowed to fester, unchecked, for far too long. He saw a black man on an expensive motorcycle, and in his twisted worldview, that could only mean one thing: theft. He didn't see a doctor, a husband, a pillar of the community. He saw a criminal. And so, with a chilling sense of inevitability, the situation spiraled out of control. O'Malley, his voice rising to a fever pitch, accused Julian of stealing the motorcycle, his words a barrage of racial slurs and baseless accusations. He demanded to see Julian's license and registration, but even as Julian complied, O'Malley's mind was already made up. He was not interested in the truth. He was interested in confirming his own biased narrative. The encounter reached its terrifying crescendo when O'Malley, his face contorted in a mask of rage, drew his weapon. The cold, hard reality of the situation crashed down on Julian with the force of a physical blow. He was a man of medicine, a man who had dedicated his life to healing, and yet here he was, staring down the barrel of a gun, his life hanging in the balance, not because of anything he had done, but because of the color of his skin. The world slowed to a crawl. The city's ambient noise faded into a dull roar, replaced by the frantic symphony of Julian's own heartbeat. The cold, metallic circle of the gun's barrel pressed against his temple was the only thing that felt real, a chilling anchor in a sea of disbelief. He could feel Maya's trembling behind him, her fear a palpable current that flowed through him. He had to be strong for her, for both of them. "Put your hands where I can see them," O'Malley barked, his voice laced with a triumphant cruelty. Julian, his mind racing, complied, his movements slow and deliberate. He had seen this scene play out 1,000 times on the news, a tragic and recurring drama that he had always watched with a sense of detached empathy. He never imagined that he would one day be cast in the lead role. As O'Malley's partner, a younger, more hesitant officer named Miller fumbled with a pair of handcuffs, Julian's mind replayed the events of the evening in a dizzying loop. The celebratory toasts, the laughter, the quiet ride with Maya, it all felt like a lifetime ago, a distant and unattainable dream. He was a man who had always believed in the power of reason, in the fundamental goodness of humanity. But in that moment, faced with the irrational hatred in O'Malley's eyes, his faith wavered. The cold, unforgiving steel of the handcuffs bit into his wrists, a physical manifestation of the injustice that was being inflicted upon him. He was being treated like a common criminal, his dignity stripped away, his humanity denied. He could feel the eyes of the city on him, the passing cars and the curious onlookers in the nearby apartment buildings. He felt a surge of shame, a feeling so alien to him that it was almost disorienting. He had never had anything to be ashamed of. Maya, her voice a mixture of fear and fury, finally broke her silence. "You have no right to do this," she said, her words a sharp, defiant counterpoint to the oppressive atmosphere. "He has done nothing wrong." O'Malley turned to her, a predatory glint in his eyes. "You'd be wise to keep your mouth shut, lady," he warned, "unless you want to join him in the back of my car." But Maya was not a woman who was easily intimidated. She had faced down an army of hostile witnesses and belligerent judges in the courtroom. She would not be silenced by a power-tripping cop with a badge and a gun. "I am his wife," she said, her voice ringing with a newfound strength. "And I am also his lawyer. And I am telling you that you are making a very big mistake." O'Malley's sneer faltered for a moment, his bravado momentarily punctured by Maya's unexpected declaration. But he quickly recovered, his arrogance reasserting itself. "A lawyer, huh?" he scoffed. "Well, you can tell it to the judge." As he was being led to the police cruiser, Julian caught a glimpse of his reflection in the car's window. He saw a man in a tailored suit, his wrists bound in handcuffs, his face a mask of disbelief and despair. He looked like a character in a movie, a tragic hero in a story that he had never wanted to be a part of. The back of the police car was a cramped and claustrophobic space, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and disinfectant. As the car pulled away from the curb, Julian watched as Maya, her face a mixture of anguish and determination, was left standing on the sidewalk, a solitary figure in the lonely night. The ride to the police station was a blur of flashing lights and muted sirens. Julian, his mind still reeling from the shock of the arrest, tried to make sense of what had just happened. He had always believed that his success, his education, his contributions to society would shield him from the kind of raw, unfiltered racism that he had just experienced. He had been wrong. He had learned in the most brutal and unforgiving way that in the eyes of some, his accomplishments would always be secondary to the color of his skin. At the police station, the nightmare continued. He was fingerprinted, photographed, and subjected to a humiliating strip search. He was treated not as a respected member of the community, but as a faceless, nameless criminal. Just another number in a system that was designed to dehumanize and degrade. As he sat in a cold, sterile holding cell, the full weight of his situation began to sink in. He thought about his patients, the lives that were in his hands. He thought about the delicate dance of nerves and synapses that he navigated with such precision in the operating room. He thought about the trust that his patients placed in him, the faith that they had in his ability to heal them. And then he thought about O'Malley, a man who had judged him not by the content of his character, but by the color of his skin. He thought about the poison of prejudice, a disease that was far more insidious and destructive than any neurological disorder he had ever encountered. In the quiet solitude of the holding cell, a new resolve began to take root in Julian's heart. He would not be broken by this experience. He would not allow the hatred of one man to define him. He would fight this injustice, not just for himself, but for all the others who had been silenced and marginalized by a system that was supposed to protect them. He would use his voice, his platform, his resources to shine a light on the darkness that he had just encountered. He would turn this personal tragedy into a catalyst for change. Maya Carter was a force of nature in the courtroom, a whirlwind of legal prowess and unwavering conviction. But as she stood on that desolate street corner, watching the red taillights of the police cruiser disappear into the night, a chilling sense of powerlessness washed over her. Her husband, the man she loved and admired, a man who had dedicated his life to healing others, was being treated like a criminal. The injustice of it all was a bitter pill to swallow. But Maya was not one to wallow in despair. Her initial shock and fear quickly gave way to a steely resolve. She was a fighter, and she would not rest until Julian was free and his name was cleared. Her mind, a finely tuned instrument of legal strategy, began to whir into action. She pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen as she began to assemble her own personal army. Her first call was to James Sarge Washington, the president of the Iron Saints, the motorcycle club that Julian belonged to. The Iron Saints were not your typical motorcycle club. They were a brotherhood of black professionals, doctors, lawyers, entrepreneurs, and even an off-duty police captain, who shared a passion for motorcycles and a commitment to community service. They were a family, a network of support that extended far beyond the open road. Sarge, a retired Marine with a commanding presence and a heart of gold, answered on the first ring. As Maya recounted the events of the evening, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief, Sarge listened in stunned silence. When she was finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then, in a low, dangerous voice that brooked no argument, Sarge said, "We're on our way." Within minutes, the quiet hum of the city was shattered by the thunderous roar of a dozen custom-built motorcycles. The Iron Saints, their faces a mixture of grim determination and righteous anger, descended on the scene like a squadron of avenging angels. They surrounded Maya, a protective phalanx of leather and steel, their presence a powerful statement of solidarity and support. Among them was Captain Marcus Thorne, a veteran police officer who had seen the best and the worst of the city's police force. He listened intently as Maya gave him a detailed account of the arrest, his brow furrowed in a deep frown. "O'Malley," he said, the name leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. "He's got a history. 17 formal complaints in 10 years, all of them dismissed." Maya's heart sank. She knew that O'Malley's record would make their fight that much harder, but it also strengthened her resolve. This was not just about Julian. It was about a system that had allowed a man like O'Malley to operate with impunity for far too long. As the Iron Saints secured the scene, preserving evidence and taking statements from witnesses, Maya made another call, this time to a trusted friend and colleague, a renowned civil rights attorney named Benjamin Carter, no relation to Julian. Ben, a man who had dedicated his life to fighting for the underdog, was a legend in legal circles, a man who had taken on the city and won on numerous occasions. Ben, a man who had seen it all, was still shocked by the blatant injustice of Julian's arrest. He agreed to take on the case without a moment's hesitation, his voice a soothing balm of reassurance in the midst of Maya's turmoil. "We're going to fight this, Maya," he said, his voice ringing with a quiet confidence. "And we're going to win." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Maya, with the help of the Iron Saints, documented every detail of the incident, collecting video footage from multiple angles and taking detailed statements from every witness. They were building a case, brick by brick, a fortress of truth that would be impenetrable to the lies and distortions that were sure to come. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale, ethereal glow over the city, Maya found herself standing in front of the police station, a small but determined army at her back. She had spent the night in a state of suspended animation, her mind focused on the task at hand. But now, as she looked at the cold, impersonal facade of the building that held her husband captive, the full emotional weight of the situation crashed down on her. Tears welled up in her eyes, hot and stinging, but she quickly blinked them away. She would not cry, not now. She had to be strong for Julian, for their future, for the fight that lay ahead. She took a deep breath, her shoulders squared, her chin held high. She was Maya Carter, and she was ready for battle. The fluorescent lights of the interrogation room hummed a monotonous, soul-crushing tune. Julian sat at a cold, metal table, the handcuffs now a dull ache on his wrists, a constant reminder of his new reality. Across from him sat Officer O'Malley, a smirk playing on his lips, a look of smug satisfaction in his eyes. He was a man who reveled in his power, a man who derived a perverse pleasure from the suffering of others. "So," O'Malley began, his voice dripping with a feigned sincerity, "you want to tell me where you got the bike?" He leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed over his chest, a picture of arrogant self-assurance. He had done this 100 times before, broken down 100 suspects, with his a mix of intimidation and manipulation. He had no reason to believe that this time would be any different. But Julian was not like the others. He was a man of immense intelligence and unwavering self-control. He had spent his life navigating the intricate labyrinth of the human brain, and he knew how to read people, how to dissect their motivations and expose their weaknesses. He looked at O'Malley and he saw not a formidable adversary, but a small, pathetic man, a man whose sense of self-worth was built on a foundation of prejudice and hate. "I built the motorcycle myself," Julian said, his voice calm and steady, a stark contrast to the chaotic turmoil that was raging inside him. "Every nut, every bolt. It's a one-of-a-kind machine, a reflection of my own personal taste and craftsmanship." O'Malley chuckled, a dismissive, condescending sound. "Sure you did," he said, his voice laced with sarcasm. "And I'm sure you've got the papers to prove it." "They're in the glove compartment of my wife's car," Julian replied, his gaze unwavering. "Along with the title and the registration all in my name." O'Malley's smirk faltered for a moment, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He had been so sure of himself, so confident in his ability to railroad another thug. But Julian's calm demeanor and irrefutable logic were beginning to chip away at his carefully constructed narrative. He decided to change tactics, to try and get under Julian's skin. "You know," he said, his voice taking on a conspiratorial tone, "we've had a lot of motorcycle thefts in this area lately. High-end bikes, just like yours. And the perpetrators, well, let's just say they all fit a certain profile." Julian's jaw tightened. He knew what O'Malley was trying to do, the ugly, insidious game he was playing. But he would not take the bait. He would not allow this man to drag him down to his level. "I am a neurosurgeon at the city's top hospital," Julian said, his voice quiet but firm. "I save lives for a living. I don't steal motorcycles." O'Malley's face contorted in a mask of rage. He was losing control, and he didn't like it. He slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing through the small, sterile room. "You think you're better than me?" he snarled, his voice a venomous hiss. "You think your fancy job and your expensive suit make you immune to the law?" "I think," Julian said, his voice rising with a newfound strength, "that you are a man who is so blinded by his own prejudice that he is incapable of seeing the truth, even when it is staring him in the face." The words hung in the air, a powerful indictment of O'Malley's character, a mirror that reflected the ugliness of his own soul. For the first time, O'Malley was speechless, his bravado stripped away, his arrogance exposed as a hollow and pathetic sham. It was at that moment that the door to the interrogation room opened, and Maya and Ben Carter walked in, a tidal wave of righteous fury and legal authority. Ben, with his imposing stature and booming voice, immediately took command of the situation. "Officer O'Malley," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl, "my name is Benjamin Carter, and I am Dr. Julian Carter's legal counsel. This interrogation is over." O'Malley, his face pale and drawn, tried to protest, but Ben cut him off with a wave of his hand. "You have made a grave error in judgment, officer," Ben continued, his eyes boring into O'Malley's with an intensity that made the hardened cop squirm in his seat. "You have arrested a man without cause. You have violated his civil rights, and you have exposed yourself and this city to a lawsuit of epic proportions." Maya, her eyes blazing with a fierce protective fire, stepped forward. "We have video evidence of the entire encounter," she said, her voice a cold, sharp blade. "We have witnesses who will testify to your unprofessional and discriminatory behavior. We have a mountain of evidence that will bury you." O'Malley, his world crumbling around him, looked from Ben to Maya, his face a mask of disbelief and despair. He had thought he was in control, that he was the one pulling the strings, but he had underestimated his opponents. He had mistaken their quiet dignity for weakness, their intelligence for arrogance, and now he was about to pay the price for his ignorance. As Julian was finally released, the first rays of dawn were breaking over the city. He walked out of the police station, a free man, but he was not the same man who had entered. He had been to the darkest corners of the human soul, and he had emerged with a new understanding of the world, a new appreciation for the fragility of justice and the enduring power of hate. He embraced Maya, his arms wrapped tightly around her, his face buried in her hair. He had never felt so grateful for her strength, her courage, her unwavering love. They had been through the fire together, and they had emerged, not unscathed, but stronger, more united, more determined than ever to fight the good fight. The story of Dr. Julian Carter's wrongful arrest spread like wildfire through the city, a spark of outrage that quickly ignited a firestorm of protest. The local news media, fueled by the compelling video footage and the damning evidence of Officer O'Malley's long and checkered history, ran front-page stories with headlines that screamed of injustice and racial profiling. The court of public opinion had convened, and the verdict was unanimous. The city had a serious problem on its hands. Protests erupted outside police headquarters, a diverse and passionate chorus of voices demanding accountability and reform. The Iron Saints, with their powerful motorcycles and their unwavering commitment to justice, became the unlikely symbols of the movement, their presence a constant and intimidating reminder of the city's failure to protect and serve all of its citizens. In the face of mounting public pressure, the city's legal team, a formidable but beleaguered group of attorneys, knew they were fighting a losing battle. The evidence against O'Malley was overwhelming, the pattern of systemic bias undeniable. They tried to control the narrative, releasing a series of carefully worded statements that promised a thorough investigation and a commitment to reform. But their words rang hollow in the ears of a public that had grown weary of empty promises and broken trust. The city, in a desperate attempt to quell the growing unrest, offered Julian a substantial settlement, a seven-figure sum that would have made him a wealthy man. But Julian was not interested in money. He was interested in justice. He wanted to ensure that what had happened to him would never happen to anyone else. He wanted to dismantle the system that had allowed a man like O'Malley to thrive, to root out the cancer of prejudice that had infected the city's police force. And so, with the full support of Maya and Ben, he rejected the city's offer and pushed for a full-blown civil rights lawsuit. A class-action suit that would represent not just him, but all 17 of the other individuals who had filed complaints against O'Malley over the years. The case, which would become one of the most significant civil rights lawsuits in the city's history, was no longer just about one man's wrongful arrest. It was about a city on trial. The legal battle that ensued was a long and arduous one, a high-stakes game of chess that played out in the hallowed halls of the city's courthouse. The city's lawyers, with their vast resources and their deep connections to the political establishment, fought tooth and nail, employing every legal maneuver and procedural tactic at their disposal to try and derail the case. But Ben Carter was a master strategist, a legal gladiator who had been honing his skills in the courtroom for decades. He and his team worked tirelessly, poring over thousands of pages of documents, deposing dozens of witnesses, and meticulously building a case that was as airtight as it was damning. Julian, though he was not a lawyer, played a crucial role in the legal proceedings. He became the face of the movement, a reluctant but powerful symbol of the fight for justice. He gave interviews, spoke at rallies, and shared his story with anyone who would listen. His quiet dignity and unwavering resolve a stark contrast to the city's defensive and evasive posturing. He also found an unexpected ally in Officer Miller, O'Malley's partner on the night of the arrest. Miller, a young and idealistic officer who had been deeply troubled by O'Malley's actions, agreed to testify against his former partner, his conscience compelling him to speak the truth, even at the risk of his own career. His testimony, a detailed and damning account of O'Malley's long history of racial profiling and abuse of power, was a turning point in the case, a powerful blow to the city's already crumbling defense. As the trial reached its climax, the city, facing the prospect of a massive and embarrassing public defeat, finally waved the white flag. They agreed to a settlement, a historic $5 million payout, that was one of the largest in the city's history. But the victory was not just a financial one. The settlement also included a series of sweeping reforms, a comprehensive plan to address the systemic issues that had allowed a man like O'Malley to operate with impunity for so long. The reforms included a new, more rigorous system for tracking and investigating citizen complaints, a revised use of force policy, and mandatory ongoing training in de-escalation and implicit bias for all officers. The city also agreed to create a new, independent civilian review board with the power to investigate and discipline officers, a move that was met with fierce resistance from the police union, but was hailed as a major victory by civil rights advocates. The settlement was a landmark achievement, a testament to the power of one man's courage and a community's unwavering demand for justice. It was a victory not just for Julian, but for all the nameless, faceless victims of police misconduct, a beacon of hope in a world that was too often shrouded in darkness. The courtroom was a study in contrasts. On one side, Julian and Maya, their faces etched with a mixture of exhaustion and relief, sat surrounded by their family and the loyal members of the Iron Saints. On the other side, the city's legal team, their expressions grim and defeated, shuffled their papers in a somber silence. The judge's voice, as he announced the terms of the settlement, was a formal and dispassionate drone, a stark contrast to the emotional tidal wave that was crashing through the room. As they emerged from the courthouse, they were greeted by a sea of reporters and well-wishers, a raucous and joyful crowd that had gathered to celebrate their victory. Julian, his voice hoarse with emotion, spoke to the crowd, his words a powerful and moving testament to the long and arduous journey that had brought them to this moment. "This was never about money," he said, his voice ringing with a newfound clarity and purpose. "This was about justice. This was about shining a light on a system that has for too long operated in the shadows. This was about ensuring that what happened to me will never happen to anyone else." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd, his gaze lingering on the faces of the young black men and women who had come to show their support. "I want to be clear about something," he continued, his voice rising with a passionate intensity. "This isn't just about one bad officer. Officer O'Malley was a symptom of a much larger disease. For 10 years, he profiled young black men. For 10 years, he violated their rights. And for 10 years, the department dismissed those complaints." His words, a powerful indictment of a broken system, hung in the air, a challenge to the city and a call to action for all who were listening. The crowd erupted in a thunderous roar of approval, a cathartic release of a community's long-simmering frustration and anger. In the weeks and months that followed, the city, under the watchful eye of the newly formed Civilian Review Board, began the slow and arduous process of implementing the reforms that had been mandated by the settlement. O'Malley was fired, his career in law enforcement over, a disgraced and pathetic figure who had become a symbol of a bygone era of policing. Julian, in a move that surprised many, used a portion of the settlement money to create a foundation dedicated to police reform and community outreach. He and Maya became tireless advocates for change, traveling the country, sharing their story, and working to build bridges between law enforcement and the communities they served. But the victory, as sweet as it was, came at a price. The lawsuit had taken a toll on Julian, both emotionally and professionally. The man who had once been a beacon of calm and control in the high-pressure world of neurosurgery now found himself struggling with a new and unwelcome companion, a persistent low-grade anxiety that was a constant reminder of the trauma he had endured. He would wake up in the middle of the night, his heart pounding, the image of O'Malley's face, contorted in a mask of rage, burned into his memory. He would find himself looking over his shoulder when he was out in public, a sense of unease and vulnerability that he had never known before. The scars of his ordeal were not just emotional, they were also professional. The lawsuit, despite its successful outcome, had created a rift between him and some of his colleagues at the hospital. There were whispers in the hallways, sidelong glances in the operating room, a sense of professional jealousy and resentment from those who saw him not as a victim of injustice, but as a man who had used his position and his race to enrich himself. He found solace in his work, in the intricate and delicate dance of surgery, a world where precision and skill were the only things that mattered. But even there, in the one place where he had always felt safe and in control, the ghosts of his past would sometimes intrude, a fleeting moment of self-doubt, a tremor in his hand that had never been there before. One evening, as he was sitting in his study, staring out at the city lights, Maya came in and sat beside him, her hand gently resting on his. "You're not alone in this, Julian," she said, her voice a soft and soothing melody. "We're in this together." He turned to her, his eyes filled with a mixture of love and gratitude. "I know," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "But some wounds, they don't heal so easily." Maya leaned her head on his shoulder, her presence a comforting anchor in the storm of his emotions. "I know," she said, her voice filled with a deep and abiding empathy. "But we'll get through this. We always do." And in that quiet moment of shared vulnerability, Julian knew that she was right. The scars of their victory would always be with them, a reminder of the battle they had fought and the price they had paid. But they were also a testament to their resilience, their courage, their unwavering love for each other. They were survivors, and they would continue to fight, not just for themselves, but for a better, more just world. Life, as it often does, had a way of throwing curveballs when you least expected them. A few years after the settlement, Julian found himself back in the familiar, sterile environment of the hospital's emergency room, not as a doctor, but as a worried husband. Maya, who had been experiencing a series of debilitating headaches, had collapsed at home, and Julian had rushed her to the hospital, his heart a leaden weight in his chest. The diagnosis was a cruel and ironic twist of fate. A rare and aggressive brain tumor located in a delicate and difficult-to-reach area of the brain. The prognosis was grim, the odds of a successful surgery slim. The irony was not lost on Julian. He, a man who had dedicated his life to healing the brains of others, was now powerless to heal the woman he loved. The neurosurgeon who was assigned to Maya's case was a man named Dr. Evans, a brilliant and highly respected surgeon who was known for his innovative and daring techniques. But as Julian sat in Dr. Evans' office, looking at the MRI scans that showed the insidious growth in Maya's brain, he felt a flicker of recognition, a sense of unease that he couldn't quite place. It wasn't until Dr. Evans turned to him, his eyes filled with a mixture of professional concern and personal empathy, that the pieces of the puzzle finally clicked into place. Dr. Evans was Miller, the young, idealistic officer who had testified against O'Malley, the man whose courage and integrity had been a turning point in their case. Miller, it turned out, had been so disillusioned by his experience on the police force that he had left to pursue his lifelong dream of becoming a doctor. He had gone back to school, excelled in his studies, and had become one of the most promising neurosurgeons in the country. And now, in a twist of fate that was almost too incredible to believe, he was the one person who held Maya's life in his hands. The surgery was a long and arduous one, a marathon of precision and skill that pushed the boundaries of modern medicine. Julian waited outside the operating room, his hands clasped in a silent prayer, his heart a tumultuous sea of hope and fear. He had placed his trust, his faith, his entire world in the hands of a man who had once been a stranger, a man who had been a part of the very system that had almost destroyed him. When Miller finally emerged from the operating room, his face etched with a mixture of exhaustion and relief, Julian knew, even before he spoke a word, that the surgery had been a success. The tumor, against all odds, had been completely removed. Maya would live. In the days and weeks that followed, as Maya slowly recovered, Julian and Miller formed an unlikely bond, a friendship that was forged in the crucible of shared experience and mutual respect. They would spend hours talking, not just about medicine, but about life, about justice, about the strange and unpredictable ways in which the universe works. One evening, as they were sitting in Maya's hospital room watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, Miller turned to Julian, his eyes filled with a deep and abiding gratitude. "You know," he said, his voice quiet and reflective, "you changed my life, Julian. You showed me what it means to be a man of courage and conviction. You inspired me to be a better person." Julian, his heart full, shook his head. "No," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We changed each other's lives. We showed each other that even in the darkest of times there is always hope. There is always the possibility of redemption." And in that moment, Julian finally understood the profound life lesson that his long and arduous journey had taught him. He had learned that justice is not always about winning or losing. It is about fighting for what is right, even when the odds are stacked against you. He had learned that forgiveness is not about condoning the actions of others. It is about releasing the anger and resentment that can poison your own soul. And he had learned that the human spirit, in its infinite capacity for resilience and compassion, is the most powerful force in the universe. He had been to hell and back, but he had emerged, not as a victim, but as a victor. A man who had transformed his personal tragedy into a testament to the enduring power of hope, healing, and the unbreakable bonds of human connection. His was a story of resilience, a story of courage, a story that would be told and retold for generations to come, a reminder that even in the face of the most profound injustice, the human heart, in its infinite capacity for love and forgiveness, will always find a way to triumph. In the end, Julian and Maya's journey reminds us of something powerful. Even when injustice breaks us, the human spirit knows how to rise. Their story shows that resilience isn't born from ease. It's forged in moments that should have destroyed us, but didn't. It teaches us that pain can become purpose, that courage isn't the absence of fear, and that healing, real healing, comes from choosing compassion when bitterness feels easier. Julian and Maya didn't just survive what happened. They transformed it. And in doing so, they showed us a path toward a world that's more just, more compassionate, and a little more human. A story like this doesn't fade when the video ends. It stays with you, because it reminds us what we're capable of. If their journey moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of the strength we all carry inside, take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe for more stories that lift the heart. Thank you for watching and for believing in the power of the human spirit.